What if the mountain Iran trusted the most turns out to be the one place it can never truly protect? Somewhere under a wall of solid granite, something is reportedly waiting. The countdown may have already started. Before we go further, if this kind of story matters to you, do one small thing right now. Tap that subscribe button like you're locking a door behind you, because once you know what's inside this mountain, you won't want to miss what happens next. And if this video pulls you in, send it to one person who still thinks this war is only about missiles and borders. Let's talk about a mountain. Before we go further, if this kind of story matters to you, Iran has spent years turning into a fortress, and one that an American president has now named directly, because once you know what's inside this mountain, as the next major target in a war that refuses to slow down. If this video pulls you in, the place is called Pickaxe Mountain. This war is only about missiles. In Persian, it's known as Kuh-e. Before we go further, if this kind of story matters to you, translates roughly to Pickaxe Mountain in English. Tap that subscribe button. A name that almost sounds too plain for a facility carrying this much weight. Because once you know what's inside this mountain, years, almost nobody outside Iran's government knew much about it. And if this no independent inspector has ever been allowed to walk through its tunnels. No outside camera has ever captured what sits at the bottom of those shafts. Now, thanks to satellite images, leaked assessments, and a president willing to speak about it openly, it may be the single most important location in the entire conflict. Here's why the story deserves your full attention. This isn't a rumor pulled from anonymous chatter online. President Trump has said it out loud in the Oval Office, standing next to reporters and cameras, with the Lebanese president sitting beside him. He said the United States will be hitting that area, in his words, pretty soon and very heavily. Days earlier, on conservative radio, he had floated the idea more carefully, calling it a possible target. By Tuesday, that careful language was gone. What replaced it was a direct, public commitment. To really understand how we got here, it helps to step back and look at the bigger picture first. This war between the United States, Israel, and Iran did not begin with Pickaxe Mountain. It stretches back through a long chain of strikes, threats, and retaliations. Last year, the United States carried out a major operation known as Operation Midnight Hammer, striking 3 of Iran's main nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. That operation was seen as a serious blow to Iran's nuclear ambitions. But it did not end the conflict. Fighting resumed in February of this year, and it has continued in waves ever since, pulling in new fronts and new targets almost every week. Pickaxe Mountain sits inside that larger story as something unusual. According to reporting, it was one of the few major underground facilities that survived Operation Midnight Hammer largely intact. While other sites were being struck, construction at this mountain reportedly continued, and by some accounts, even accelerated. That alone tells you something important. While the world was watching the more famous targets, this quieter facility kept growing in the background. So what exactly is Pickaxe Mountain, and why has it suddenly become the center of everything? To understand that, we need to go back to 2020. That year, a sabotage operation, widely believed to have been carried out by Israel, destroyed an advanced centrifuge production plant at Iran's Natanz enrichment complex. Centrifuges are the machines used to spin uranium gas at extremely high speeds, gradually increasing its purity. Without them, a country cannot enrich uranium toward the levels needed for either civilian power or, in a worst case, a weapon. To put that in simple terms, uranium needs to be enriched to only a few percent for use in a civilian power plant. It needs to reach around 90% purity to be considered weapons grade. Iran has publicly stated it is enriching uranium to 60%, a level with no clear civilian use, but still short of what would be needed for a weapon. That gap, the space between 60% and 90%, is exactly why so much attention is placed on facilities like this one. It is the space where a civilian program and a potential weapons program become difficult to tell apart from the outside. According to Iran's own government, construction began almost immediately on a new facility meant to replace what had been destroyed. That facility became Pickaxe Mountain, built about 1.5 miles south of Natanz, buried deep into Iran's Zagros mountain range. On paper, it was described as a simple replacement, a new home for centrifuge assembly. But satellite images tell a different story. Analysts from the Institute for Science and International Security have studied this site closely for years. What they found is a complex far larger than anything a basic assembly plant would ever require. The mountain itself is unusual too. Most of the surrounding Zagros range is made of softer sedimentary rock. This particular mountain is dense, hard granite, almost as if it had been chosen specifically because it was harder to break through. Estimates of the facility's depth vary. Some assessments suggest the tunnels sit around 100 to 145 meters beneath the surface. Other reports, including recent coverage tied to this stage of the conflict, suggest sections may run far deeper, possibly as much as 600 meters in places. If that upper estimate is accurate, this facility could sit in territory that even the most advanced conventional weapons in the American arsenal have never truly been tested against. Now here's where the story shifts from construction history to urgent, present-day danger. According to reporting from the Wall Street Journal, cited widely across other outlets, Israeli intelligence believes Iran moved centrifuges into Pickaxe Mountain last fall. If accurate, this detail changes the entire meaning of the facility. It would no longer simply be an assembly site. It could become an active piece of Iran's enrichment capability, hidden somewhere even international inspectors have never been allowed to see. This connects to a much larger, unresolved question that has followed this war for months. Iran is believed to hold roughly 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, a level dangerously close to weapons grade. The International Atomic Energy Agency has repeatedly said it cannot verify exactly where that stockpile is being kept. Back in March, the agency's Director General, Rafael Grossi, stated that a significant portion of that material, roughly 200 kilograms, is believed to be stored in deep tunnels near a nuclear complex outside Isfahan. That description points, almost certainly, toward this exact mountain, tucked away where no camera, satellite, or inspector has ever fully confirmed what lies beneath the surface. When reporters asked Trump directly whether Iran had really moved centrifuges into Pickaxe Mountain, he didn't deny the reporting. He simply said the United States doesn't have it confirmed. Then he added something that reveals how his administration seems to be thinking about the entire strategy behind this next strike. He said it doesn't matter whether centrifuges are there unless Iran actually has uranium to enrich. And then he said something worth remembering. We follow the material. That's where the action is. Think about what that sentence really means. It is a striking admission coming directly from the president in front of live cameras. It suggests American targeting isn't only based on what a building was originally built for. It's based on tracking wherever Iran's actual material and capability physically move to, and striking those locations, regardless of the facility's official history or declared purpose. This is worth pausing on, because it reflects a broader shift in how this entire war seems to be fought. Early strikes largely targeted fixed, well-known infrastructure, facilities whose purpose and location had been studied for years. But as the war has dragged on, both sides have adapted. Iran has reportedly worked to disperse and hide sensitive material and equipment, moving them away from obvious, already struck locations. In response, American and Israeli intelligence appear to be shifting their own approach, following the material itself, rather than simply restriking the same buildings again and again. That back and forth, hide and seek playing out with satellites, underground tunnels, and some of the most dangerous material on Earth is really the core tension driving this entire next phase of the conflict. Trump has repeated this theme in other comments too, saying there is evidence Iran is trying to rebuild parts of its nuclear program that survived earlier strikes. Any site where they're even thinking about nuclear activity, he said, will be hit very powerfully. This all comes during what U.S. Central Command has confirmed as 10, now moving toward 11, consecutive nights of sustained strikes against targets inside Iran. According to live coverage from multiple outlets tracking this stage of the war, recent nights have included renewed strikes reaching into Tehran itself, alongside continued operations elsewhere. Nearly 100 American service members have reportedly been injured over the past 2 weeks of this campaign, though most have returned to duty. 18 American deaths have already been confirmed across the broader conflict. Iran's own military command has not stayed quiet about these threats. Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya military command has reportedly said that if the United States moves ahead with a strike on Pickaxe Mountain, it would represent what they described as an explosion of war across the wider region. That kind of language matters, because it signals Iran does not see this as just another target among many. It sees this facility as a red line, tied directly to its national identity and its long-term nuclear ambitions. This is also part of why neighboring countries are watching so closely. Trump himself has linked ongoing pressure on Iran to demands for free navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important shipping routes in the world for global oil. Strikes throughout this campaign have already reportedly reached targets tied to Iran in Kuwait, and officials across the region, including in Bahrain and Jordan, have expressed concern about the conflict spreading further. A strike on a facility as symbolically important as Pickaxe Mountain could easily become the spark. That pulls even more countries into direct involvement. If you're only now discovering how serious this specific location has become, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Not because I'm asking for a favor, but because stories like this move fast, and you deserve to see the next update the moment it happens, not days later when everyone already knows. Now let's talk about why striking this mountain is nowhere near as simple as it sounds. Andrea Stricker, Deputy Director of the Non-Proliferation Program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, has laid out the stakes clearly. She argues that before any real conclusion can be reached in this war, two things must happen. First, Pickaxe Mountain has to be neutralized. Second, Iran's highly enriched uranium stockpile has to be recovered or destroyed, so it cannot fall into the hands of remaining regime elements or other dangerous actors. That framing tells you this isn't just one target among many. It may be the single most important remaining objective in the entire conflict. Satellite images from mid-February, reviewed by independent analysts, reportedly show Iran actively reinforcing the facility, specifically hardening it against exactly the kind of strikes now being threatened publicly. In other words, Iran already understood how seriously this location was being watched, long before Trump's most recent direct comments. But here is the honest, complicated truth underneath all of this. Even America's most powerful conventional weapons may not be enough. Earlier in this war, the United States used the GBU-57, a massive 13.5-ton bunker-busting bomb, designed to punch through solid rock before detonating deep underground. 7 B-2 stealth bombers carried out that mission, flying roughly 18 hours round trip in a strike that successfully damaged sensitive equipment inside the Fordo facility, according to the IAEA's own assessment. That was a major achievement, but multiple independent analysts have raised real doubts about whether that same weapon, however effective against Fordo, could reach deep enough to seriously damage Pickaxe Mountain. According to reporting from Reuters and the Washington Post, some U.S. officials themselves reportedly believe this facility may simply be too deep for even the country's most advanced bunker buster bombs to fully destroy. If that assessment holds true, and if the mountain really does sit near the deeper end of that 100 to 600 meter range, this war may be facing something it has not truly confronted before. A target that has been publicly promised destruction, without a confirmed weapon capable of delivering it through air power alone. David Albright, a nuclear expert who has tracked this facility for years, put it in the simplest possible terms when speaking about the challenge involved. "You don't look to get a bunker buster to pass through the mountain," he reportedly said, "because that is just not possible. Instead, according to experts like Albright, military planners may need to think differently about this target altogether. Rather than trying to punch straight through hundreds of meters of granite, the more realistic approach might involve disabling the facility from the outside in, targeting its tunnel entrances, its ventilation shafts, and its electrical systems. Cut off the air, cut off the power, and seal the entrances, and a facility deep inside a mountain can become useless without ever being directly penetrated. That idea is worth sitting with, because it changes how we should picture a potential strike. This may not look like the dramatic single explosion many viewers picture when they hear the words bunker buster. It could look more like a slow, deliberate strangling of the facility's ability to function, cutting off everything that keeps it alive from the surface, while the deepest chambers remain physically intact underneath all that granite. That tension is worth sitting with for a moment because it echoes patterns we've seen throughout this entire war. Time and again, American and Allied forces have shown a sharp understanding of finding an opponent's specific weak points, whether that's ventilation systems, exposed infrastructure, or predictable transport routes. And Pickaxe Mountain does appear to have at least one such weak point. According to satellite imagery from July 9th, reviewed by the Institute for Science and International Security, a pair of western tunnel entrances at the facility remain open. That detail matters, because it suggests these entrances could be vulnerable to precision strikes aimed directly at the openings, or potentially to some form of ground-based operation entering through those same tunnels. Read that carefully, because it raises a possibility we haven't discussed in quite this way before. If airstrikes alone cannot guarantee this facility's destruction, and if these open tunnel entrances are the most exposed part of the entire complex, then neutralizing Pickaxe Mountain might eventually require something far more dangerous than another bombing run. It could mean troops physically entering those tunnels. That would represent an entirely new category of risk in this war, a shift from strikes delivered at altitude to operations carried out on the ground, inside a facility whose internal layout and defenses remain largely unknown to outside observers. Now let's look honestly at the other side of this argument, because there's a real case for striking this mountain even without guaranteed total destruction. Trump himself has repeated a specific idea throughout this war. Every time we hear about it, we blow it up, he said about Iran's broader nuclear efforts. So they don't like talking about it. That framing suggests the value of striking Pickaxe Mountain might not depend entirely on wiping it out completely in one operation. Even a partial strike, one that collapses tunnel entrances, damages surface structures, or forces Iran to spend resources on repair instead of active enrichment, could meaningfully slow down whatever plans Iran may be pursuing. There's also a broader symbolic message at play. Trump has repeatedly pointed to the combined damage from earlier operations, claiming it will take Iran 20 to 25 years to fully recover its nuclear program. Whether or not the specific number holds up under independent scrutiny, the larger message is clear. No facility, no matter how deep, how hidden, or how reinforced, is meant to feel permanently out of reach. But there is a real risk hiding inside that message too. If Pickaxe Mountain truly sits beyond the reach of current weapons, a highly publicized strike that fails to achieve its goal could send the opposite signal. Instead of showing strength, it could reveal a limit, and that could give Iran more confidence that deep, hardened construction really can offer lasting protection, even against sustained pressure from the world's most advanced military. This is one reason nonproliferation experts, including Sarah Bidgood, have emphasized how important it is for the IAEA to regain real access to this site. Not satellite images, not military assumptions. Actual inspectors, walking through actual tunnels, confirming what is really there instead of leaving the world to guess. It's worth remembering how Trump himself described this site, just a short time before his Oval Office comments. Speaking on the Hugh Hewitt show, he said the United States was watching Pickaxe Mountain closely, and claimed no activity was visible there at that moment. They're not doing well with their nuclear situation, he said. He suggested that Iran avoids even discussing the facility publicly, because every time attention turns toward it, the United States responds with force. That comment, whether read as confidence or as a warning, shows how central this single location has become to the broader narrative of the war, almost a symbol of whether Iran's nuclear ambitions can survive sustained American pressure at all. There is also the deeper strategic question analysts keep returning to. Even if Pickaxe Mountain is disabled in some way, does that actually end Iran's nuclear ambitions? Or does it simply push the country toward building the next hidden facility, perhaps even deeper, perhaps even better concealed? Some experts argue that as long as the underlying knowledge and intent remain, physical destruction of any single site, no matter how large or symbolically important, only buys time rather than delivering a permanent solution. Others argue that repeated, sustained destruction of every attempt Iran makes to rebuild is itself a form of long-term strategy, one designed to make reconstruction so costly and so risky that it eventually becomes unsustainable. Which of these views proves correct may only become clear years from now, long after this specific chapter has faded from headlines. If this story has helped you understand why one mountain has become the center of an entire war, do something simple. Leave a like on this video right now. It takes 1 second. It tells me you want more breakdowns like this one. So what should you watch for in the days ahead? There are a handful of specific developments worth tracking closely, and none of them are guaranteed to unfold quickly or predictably. First, watch whether Trump's promise of pretty soon turns into an actual confirmed strike. If it does, pay close attention to independent assessments afterward, whether from the Institute for Science and International Security, satellite imagery analysts, or official statements. The real question won't be whether a strike happened. It will be whether that strike reached deep enough to matter, or whether it mostly damaged the surface while leaving deeper chambers intact. Second, watch closely for any signs of a ground operation. Given that analysts have already flagged those open western tunnel entrances as a vulnerability, any reporting suggesting troops entering the facility directly would represent a major escalation. A ground operation inside hostile, unmapped tunnels, built specifically to be defended, would carry risks that airstrikes do not. It would mean American or Allied forces operating inside a mountain whose internal layout remains almost entirely unknown. That is a very different kind of danger than a bomber flying overhead and returning safely to base. Third, keep an eye on whether the IAEA gains any renewed access to inspect this site before or after any strike. Since inspectors have never been allowed inside Pickaxe Mountain, real verification would offer something reliable. And fourth, watch how Iran's government responds. Officials have already warned that any strike could be treated as a serious act of war, given its link to the nuclear program and possible connection to the uranium stockpile. Any retaliation tied to this location could become one of the most significant turning points this war has produced. There's a fifth thing worth tracking too, even though it moves more slowly. Watch how the diplomatic conversation shifts. Wars like this one rarely end purely through military action alone. At some point, there is almost always a return to negotiation. If Pickaxe Mountain becomes the flashpoint that finally forces both sides back toward the table, that could matter just as much. On the other hand, if this strike becomes just one more escalation, it may simply set the stage for whatever target comes after it. Here is the truth sitting underneath this entire story. Iran built Pickaxe Mountain because it believed depth, secrecy, and hard granite could offer the kind of protection that Fordo ultimately failed to provide. Every piece of available evidence, from reinforcement work to intelligence suggesting transferred centrifuges, points toward this facility. Think about the pure engineering logic behind this mountain for a moment. Iran did not choose this location by accident. Engineers reportedly studied the surrounding terrain and specifically selected a spot where the rock was harder and denser. That is the decision of a country trying to build something meant to outlast direct military pressure, something meant to survive exactly the kind of war it now finds itself in. And yet, depth and hardness alone may not be enough. Modern warfare has increasingly focused not just on brute force, but on precision, on finding small, overlooked weaknesses. A tunnel entrance left open, a ventilation shaft that has to exist, a supply route that has to be used eventually. These are the kinds of details that turn theoretically unstoppable fortresses into targets that can in fact be reached. And now, for the first time in this entire conflict, an American president has stood in front of national cameras and said, without hedging, that this mountain is about to be hit, and hit hard. Whether America's weapons can truly reach deep enough to make good on that promise is still an open question, one that serious experts have raised without a clear answer. It may ultimately require a kind of operation far more dangerous than anything this war has produced so far. Whatever happens next, one thing is already clear. Pickaxe Mountain has stopped being a quiet construction project. It has become a test case for an entire era of modern warfare, a test of whether depth and secrecy can still guarantee safety. Iran spent years believing this mountain could succeed where Fordo failed. Whether that belief survives is still being decided. If this video gave you real clarity on why Pickaxe Mountain has become the most urgent target, don't just scroll past. Share it with someone who still thinks this war is simple. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens the moment that first strike lands. Because with the president's own words now on record and the strikes already stretching past 10 straight nights, whatever happens to this mountain next may happen sooner than anyone expects. And when it does, you'll want to be one of the people who already understood exactly why it mattered.